He said, "My word is not a book of rules. It's an autobiography." And as I read what he had written through me, it just proves once again how few words he needs to say so much. I've caught myself while reading the Bible in thinking that what is happening there, that I need to replicate it in some way, that I am supposed to live exactly as they did. And don't get me wrong, I think the Bible is meant to inspire our way of living, but not by looking at the characters in it and thinking I need to do exactly what they did. Instead, looking at what those stories tell us about the one who created the miracle, the one who created us. What does what Moses did for the Israelites tell us about who God is? What do the miracles that Jesus expresses throughout the Gospels, that he shows, that he delivers, that he heals people, what do those miracles say about who God is? I think there is this tendency for us as humans to try and find the formula. So we see something that works, or we read about something that works, and then our natural tendency is to try and replicate that scenario so that we are guaranteed to replicate the result we read about or we've seen. And this can be even in our own lives. Maybe something worked one time, then we try to replicate the steps that got us to that point because we're assuming the same steps will give us the same results. The danger here is that we are limiting God, or we are limiting how his spirit can move through us. We're not limiting him. He is not limited, but we are limiting the experience that we can have of him by thinking that he can only show up in the ways that we read he's shown up before, or that we've seen him show up before in our own lives. Instead, if we read the Bible as his autobiography, a series of memories that reflect who he is, his character, his motivations, his desires, when we start looking at each and every story and asking ourselves, what does this story tell me about who he is? Then we start seeing that Jesus performed all of those miracles out of a place of unconditional love. That God held the Israelites and carried them through all of those hardships despite their disobedience because it was coming from a place of unconditional love. That God created man even though he knew they would fall into sin and that he would have to save us again, all because of unconditional love. And that when we start recognizing who he is and focusing on who he is and having a personal relationship with him, we are no longer limiting him, or better to say, we are no longer limiting the experience that we get to have of him. An example I have of this is when we read about Gideon in the book of Judges and how he delivered the Israelites. And so Gideon was raised up. He, similar to his forefather Moses, supported God in delivering the Israelites and performing the miracles, or having God perform the miracles through him. And so then when Gideon passes away, the Israelites fall back into sin. Right? They no longer have a leader. They no longer have Moses. Now they no longer have Joshua. Then they no longer have Gideon. And so when Gideon passes away, the Israelites fall back into sin. They fall back into worship of false gods, of counterfeit gods, and more specifically, the counterfeit god Baal of that time. And so I asked the Lord, I was like, why is it that every time the Israelites didn't have a a tangible guide, that they fell back into the sin of idolatry, that they fell back into worship of false gods. And the response that I received in the Spirit was that he said, they fell back into sin because they were focused on my actions and not on who I am. They fall back into sin because they are focused on my actions and not on who I am. And then I wondered, what does he mean by that? And the Spirit showed me so beautifully. He says, if the Israelites would have been focused on who God is, each and every time a miracle was performed through one of his vessels like Moses or Joshua or Gideon, who delivered his people in a miraculous way, if the Israelites had been focused on the fact that a God who provides such miracles to save them, to deliver them, is one who must love them so much, if they could really harness on the love and the grace of God, then when their leadership fell away and there were no tangible miracles happening one after the other, they would have realized that they were in a time of rest. That the miracles weren't necessary at that time because they had already been delivered, and that now they had the opportunity to rest in the love of God in a peaceful and harmonious way. That they had time to build their own personal relationships with him by just resting in what he had already done and what he had already said before trying to move on to the next thing. But because the Israelites were so focused on the actions, the miracles, the ways that God delivered them, the what of what he did, when he didn't do anything, or at least when they didn't see him do anything, they sought their miracles elsewhere. They went to worship other gods. They went to create gods because they were looking for action. They were looking for sensation. To them, having a God was having someone who did things for you, who performed miracles, who showed tangible expressions of the supernatural. And so the moment that went into a resting phase, which is a very important season, we can't always be go, go, go. There needs to be a resting phase. Instead of resting in who he is, they try to replicate what he did by worshiping other gods when he was quiet. And so when we bring that back to what God initially spoke to me, which is, my word is not a book of rules. It is my autobiography. In that, he was reflecting that we do the same every single time that we read his word and just see it as a list of things to do, or see it as a list of things that he will do for us, instead of seeing it as a expression, a description, an inspiration of who he is, the character that he has, and allowing it to bring us closer into prayer and into communion with him by building our own personal relationships. And through those personal relationships, seeing whichever miracle, wonder that he wishes to perform by his grace and by his unconditional love for us, for that to be expressed through us uniquely in a completely new way. When we try to live the life of someone else, to replicate the life of someone else, we miss out on the very personal and unique wonders and promises that God has prepared for us specifically. No one in the Bible was trying to replicate the life of someone else. No, they were just living their unique lives and being uniquely touched by the Lord. And so those stories are designed to be an inspiration for us to grow closer to the one who performed those miracles out of love for us to experience his love for ourselves. And that through the experience of his love for ourselves, we become a story that inspires others to grow closer to him. Just like the stories in the Bible were designed to inspire us to grow closer to the one who made them.